Hello, and welcome to Behind the Booth, now sponsored by the fine folks at Nerd Night News. I'm your host, Terry Mayo, and today I'll be joined by a member of the Nerd Night News crew, Mr. Rick Tastic. Together we'll be talking to comic book creator James Powell. James has had stories published in Dark Horse, Image, Random House, and currently he has a book called House of Fear that is live on Kickstarter. I'm excited to talk to James about this book because I am a fan of all things spooky, especially spooky stories. So this will be cool. But before we get started, I want to remind you to please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so we can keep bringing you that awesome content. All right, it's House of Fear time. All right, well, hey, James, thank you very much for joining the show. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course,
Thank you as well.
It's fun to take some time out of our weekend and kind of get together and talk about comics and what we love about them. So let's jump on in. I know that we've kind of floated around the same circles, so like on Facebook and Twitter and whatnot, but we've never really had a chance to really connect. So this is a first. I'm excited.
This is nice. Yeah, to put a name to a face and talk in person, so to speak. So yeah, this is nice.
See that I'm real. I'm not a bot or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I wanted to. First, let me, if you don't mind, can we jump into the Kickstarter that you have? You have a Kickstarter out that's got 9 days left-ish, 8 or 9 days left.
8 or 9 days. Yep.
Okay. And what is the name of your book?
House of Fear. It's Goosebumps meets Tales from the Crypt. So it's scary stories for kids. I wouldn't quite say it's all ages, but it's more. The target audience is 8 to 12. Years old, so they're kind of graduating from the all ages stories and getting into stories that are a little bit more tense, a little bit more action. And with my stories, since there's quote unquote scary, I try to add a panel or two, or the bad guy's a typical monster, classic monster kind of thing. So my goal is to kind of get kids to move from the all ages into the more teen friendly stuff. It's kind of like that gap.
That's very cool, man. Do you find that kind of being your wheelhouse, your niche, or is this a pet project, or how did you get started with House of Fear?
So it's funny. My son, when he was about 6, I had just finished my longest graphic novel script, and he asked me if he was going to be able to read it, and I said no, it's kind of violent, it's more for adults. And he was like, well, when are you going to write a story for me? And so for the next 2 or 3 days, I kind of just like, wow, I'm kind of a terrible dad. I'm spending all this time on comics and my son can't read any of them. So that weekend I sat down with him and I said, do you want to write one together? So together,
awesome.
We created the first House of Fear. He came up with the premise, which was a family moving to a new neighborhood and the house across the street was haunted. He came up with the character names, some of the premise behind it, and then I totally got stuck at the end and I said, I need to figure out how this ends. And he was like, oh, you just need to do this. And I was like, oh that is perfect. So that's what I ended up using. So it's exciting. I mean, it's kind of a pet project, but at the same time, it's what I love now. It's something that just comes. I don't know if comics I would say it comes natural because I have to rewrite and polish and just like every other writer. But it's kind of my wheelhouse now. It feels like I've secured the tone and I know my audience well enough now that I can kind of sail through some of the scripts, whereas some of the more adult stuff I do isn't quite as easy because it's a totally different tone. It's a different audience. So
right.
I was about to ask, how do you aim for a narrow range like that, 8 to 12 years old? But then knowing that your son was participating in creating it makes more sense how you could target such a narrow age range.
Right. He definitely helped me a great deal, actually, just watching his reaction to some of the ideas. He's a big reader, so I kind of watched what he gravitates towards and what he shies away from, both as far as reading, but also TV shows or movies as well. If I see him cowering in the corner with the blanket over his head while we're watching a movie. I'm like, okay, that seems to be a line as far as movies go. Where's that line in comics? So it's actually kind of fun to have him help me in that regard.
Very cool.
Was his input like instrumental in volume 2? Because this is volume 1 and 2 that you're kickstarting.
Yeah, this is volume 2. So there's 8 new stories. It's 176 pages. So he hasn't been helping me as far as the script writing and the development, because he's getting into more and more difficult stuff at school. So a lot more homework and more intense classes or whatever. But he's still reading them, and I'm still bouncing ideas off him at the dinner table. Mom's just like kind of sitting back watching as we're talking about all this horror stuff, but it's like, what monster should I bring out next? Or I'll sometimes just be like, okay, you're a kid and you're playing video games and suddenly your house is surrounded by aliens. What do you do? And whatever his response is, I kind of like, okay, that's what I'm going to start.
That's such a good idea.
Right.
So he's kind of like a co-writer, like a writer's room, a writer's table. He just doesn't know it.
Yeah.
Is he getting credit in the book, hopefully, or no?
In the first volume, he did, yeah.
Silent partner in the second.
He's actually attended a few conventions with me, and he's answered questions on panels and stuff, which is kind of fun to watch.
Oh, wow.
Really
He signed some books and stuff, and it's fun to watch him do that. It's kind of cool.
Right? That's so cool. That is so cool. I mean, I've got kids of my own. I'm going to start farming them out for my own writer's tables.
Yeah, if it's a success, it was all your idea. If it fails, well, I had my kids.
Came from the kid. What do you want me to do?
An 8-year-old wrote this. What are you talking about?
Right.
So one of the things that caught my eye, of course, the book, but one of the things that caught my eye was the sea monkeys homage with the, what is it, Shoggoths? Is that
Shoggoths? Yeah.
That is very cool. I'll show an image here, but how did you guys come up with, I guess, the feel and the imagery of this monster? Is it Shoggoths?
I pronounce it Shoggoths, but I've probably heard it 5 different ways. Same with all Lovecraft monsters. It seems like depending on who you are, where you're from, it's a different pronunciation. But so it's very few people know this, but my second issue was written by Brandon Barrows, a big Lovecraft fan, and I edited it. And that was back when I wasn't sure if I wanted other writers to do House of Fear. At first, it was going to be a true anthology series, but instead of a book, I was going to release individual issues with a new writer every time. And I pitched him the idea, because he's such a Lovecraft fan, of doing a Lovecraft for Kids comic. And we kind of bounced around and came up with the idea that a boy finds an old comic in his dad's collection, like, from the 60s or whatever, actually mails in the money to get a grow your own monsters, and they actually come.
Nice.
And then the principal flushes them down the toilet and they grow in the sewer. But because of that theme, because of the plot, the premise, I had James Hyslop, the artist behind the Boyle character, who does Boyle is the host of House of Fear. He introduces it at the end of every story, kind of signs off or whatever. But yeah, the Sea Monkeys ads were so fundamental when I grew up. Everything looked so fascinating in those ads. The strong man. Oh wow! If I send in $1, I can be huge like this dude, or I can grow these fish or these sea monkeys just by water. And so of course, when we did that issue, we had to do the print, the art style to mimic that. And
but just that one image alone took me back to those 7-Eleven comic books where it's like, what is it, Creep Show or House of Fear or whatever, and those ads with the X-ray specs, which I'm still convinced work.
And it's that the print we have is really really tied to that ad from the 60s and 70s. If you go compare the two, I was pretty diligent about making the same number of bullet points. I even have some typos that were based on the old ad.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Some of the points don't have bullets, some do. Some of them have funky capitalization. I kept that in. But then there's a whole bunch of H.P. Lovecraft, just tiny Easter eggs. And then in the background, there's the House of Fear. So yeah, that came together just so well. I'm so happy for that. And anyone who backs both campaigns, the Sea for Cthulhu and House of Fear, at a print level will get that. So
very cool, man. That is
Very
awesome.
cool.
Well, the feel behind this show basically is to kind of give anybody who wants to come on YouTube or wherever else they might see this a chance to get to know you and kind of walk up to your virtual booth and pick up a virtual copy of House of Fear and ask you the question, what is this about? So if you don't mind, could you let us know what's House of Fear about?
So House of Fear is what's that? Oh, the elevator pitch. My elevator pitch would be Goosebumps meets Tales from the Crypt. That kind of targets the kid element and the scary element. They're all standalone stories. So like if you were to come to my booth at a convention, you could leave with just one, get a complete story, and not have to worry about tracking me down next year or trying to find part 2. Because it's all standalone. And my goal is to make each one, no matter if it's 16 pages or 40, I think my stories are anywhere between 14 and I think the longest is 40 pages. They all have strong beginning, middles, and ends. I want to make sure that you have a full story when you walk away from that table. And like I said, and to be honest, this is going longer than the elevator pitch, but I would say half my audience don't even have kids. It's the comic reader who remembers Goosebumps or they can still admit that they occasionally watch Scooby-Doo. It's that kind of tone. I try to make them fun and engaging, you know.
One last time, the Kickstarter is live right now. It's live this is going to be Monday that you're seeing this, so it's there for another 8 days. Make sure you go on Kickstarter, look for House of Fear, back it, tell your friends to back it, your grandma and your sister and your cousin to back it, and share that thing on social media. That way we can get more and more volumes of House of Fear, as long as James and his son don't mind putting it out.
Yeah, we'll keep making them. People keep showing interest.
There you go. All right. Well, for Nerd Night News and for Behind the Booth, I'm Terry, and we have Rick and Mr. James Powell. Thank you guys very much for joining us.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, James.
Hey, you made it to the end. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you know someone that you'd like to see on the show, leave us a comment down below and see if we can make that happen. While you're down there, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so we can keep delivering that sweet, sweet content. And before you move on to cat videos or car chases or whatever else you're into, check out some of these other Nerd Night News shows. Enjoy.